Hello and welcome to Southwest Londoner's World Cup review live stream. I'm your host, Matt Cox, and today we're going to preview Sunday's showpiece in Doha between France, the holders, and Argentina, as well as looking back on the tournament so far. Teams that have shocked us with how well they've done or how badly they've done. We'll also ask how we should interpret England's performance, obviously having only gone out in the quarterfinals. We're going to also look through some of the themes of the tournament, Messi's performances, African teams doing well, and of course, sports washing, which has been a massive discussion this winter. It feels like ages ago that Ana Valencia hit a brace in that first game to defeat the hosts, which really set us off to quite a boring first start of the group stages. However, the last round really picked things up. With South Korea, Japan, and Morocco all upsetting the odds in the third of their games. The round of 16 went almost entirely as expected, but Morocco emerged as this tournament's shock side and also won their quarterfinal. Most recently, we've had our two semi-finals, and that's where we're going to start and bring in our first guests, with hopefully Ben and Aisling joining me now.
Oh, hello.
So, guys, you're here to talk about your two semi-finals. Do you want to just take me through the action first? What happened?
So the first game was Croatia against Argentina. I actually was in a pub with a lot of Croatians watching the game. It was an interesting atmosphere. I think the Croatians that I spoke to were a sort of mix. They were confident and they hoped that they could get the job done. But I think also that placing in perspective that they were up against an Argentinian side that spearheaded by Lionel Messi and that team that is well balanced and has such depth. And I think that in the end that depth and that quality ultimately shone through. I don't think Croatia put out their best display, but it was a great performance from Argentina, and I think they're deserved place in the final after a really bad start against Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and I think the second semi-final between France and Morocco was kind of expected. It was an expected result, but Morocco never gave up. Even when they were 2-0 down, they kept pressing rather than accepting the defeat. So it was quite impressive. Obviously, France were really good on the night, but Morocco obviously had injuries. Saiss had to go off after 20 minutes and he probably shouldn't have started. He picked up a hamstring injury in the quarterfinal. And Aguirre didn't start. He was in the starting 11 and then got replaced at the last minute. So I think the team felt the effect of that too, because both have been so solid throughout the tournament. Morocco have actually raised a complaint to FIFA about the referee on the night, Cesar Ramos. 2 penalty claims in the first half that weren't given. So the first was when Theo Hernandez slid in on Boufal in the box, and instead of giving Morocco a penalty, he booked Boufal, which was a bit bizarre. I know it was 50-50, but it would have been, would have made more sense to book Hernandez over Boufal if he was booking anyone. And then Amala was brought down in the box when a corner was being taken, and that was waved away too. So they have a reason to complain, but at the end of the day, France were the stronger side.
And obviously, despite going out in the semi-final, this has been a really impressive tournament for Morocco. Why do we think that's been the case?
I think, obviously being the first African team to reach the semi-finals, which was completely unprecedented. Of any of the African teams at the tournament, like Ghana and Senegal, even without Mane, were probably back to go the furthest. Morocco didn't really get many talking before the tournament because they finished the 2018 World Cup bottom of their group. But they did have a flawless journey through the qualifications, and then they got a new manager, which brought the team back to life. And it was clear in every game that bringing Ziyech out of retirement was huge. He was like a huge leader on the pitch, those around him trusted what he was doing. But also other players like Saiss and Aguirre at the back, both in the Premier League, but not massive names, played so well in defence, conceding one goal and an own goal up until the semi. So I think they just came together really well. The manager obviously played a massive part in that. But as a team, they brought out the best in each other. Players like Boufal, for example, who spent 3 years at Southampton, didn't really make a massive lasting impact there, but played so well for Morocco, completely ruining Marcos Llorente's day in the last 16 with Spain. But I think overall their momentum just increased because they believed fairly on that they could be big teams.
Yeah, and because Morocco were such a shock, I think it's easy to forget, isn't it, that Croatia actually were a shock as well. Ben, what do you think's been the key to their success?
Yeah, I think the fact they've made it to 2 successive semi-finals. Well, I mean, they made it to the final in 2018, but they've made it to the last 4 on both these occasions. You know, they were the 3rd smallest nation at this tournament. I think their population is just a smidge under 4 million. So yeah, it's a remarkable achievement in both those tournaments when you put it in perspective. And I think there's, you know, sort of like Ashley mentioned with Morocco, there is this collective spirit and this collective understanding of how they're going to play. You know, they're blessed with such quality in midfield, and you know, this may all have been Luka Modric's last World Cup, but he's been fantastic. And you know, you've got Brozovic and Pasalic and others in that midfield who done well. But I think there's just such an understanding of the system and the style of football they want to play. Look, is sometimes not the most exciting. You know, they still haven't won a game in 90 minutes since I think it was 1998 in the knockout rounds, that is. So there is an element that they've, you know, perhaps got a bit lucky with a few penalty shootouts and you know, taking games late, but that's the way they've played. And I think they come in with a lot of quality, but also that underdog spirit and that underdog mentality that really serves them well and has helped them reach to that stages on these 2 occasions.
And you were watching their semi-final with a few Croatians yourself, weren't you? What do you think they're going to remember from this tournament, and how will they look back on it?
Yeah, I think with immense pride. When the full-time whistle went, you know, there was a round of applause from everyone that I was surrounded with, also applauding the players and applauding the efforts. I think they realised that although they've had great performances in the last 2 tournaments, there's no divine right for any country, let alone a country of their size, to reach the latter stages. And I think a lot of the people around me were just sort of cherishing that and you know, really appreciative of what this side's been able to do on the world stage. So yeah, I think they'll be really happy. Obviously, you know, disappointed with how the semi-final panned out. I think, you know, this Argentina side are very good, but I don't think Croatia were anywhere near their best. But yeah, I think another hugely encouraging performance from them. And any time a country of, you know, their size reaches the semi-finals of World Cup, it's a fantastic achievement.
And with the likes of Modric not getting any younger, do you think we should expect this from them again next tournament? People sort of thought that 2018 was a one-off. Can they stay amongst the elite on the world stage, do you think?
I think they can. Look, they have the underdog status and they have that sort of mentality, but there's a real quality in this squad. And I think, as you say, even with the likes of Modric potentially leaving, that's a massive hole they're going to have to fill. But you know, all throughout the pitch, you've got you know, Mislav Orsic, who didn't play a whole lot at this tournament. I think he's someone up front that is exciting. They've got Lovro Mayer that's just starting to work his way through. He's perhaps a bit more attacking in the midfield, but another player that they can hinge around their sort of their midfield options. But I think for them, even though they've got to remain with this sort of underdog spirit, there has to be an element of, you know, trying to assert themselves and maybe be a bit more positive when they come up against some of these teams and you know, find that balance between actually they've got a really good squad despite their relative size, but also maintaining that spirit. And yeah, I still think that, you know, they might not be getting to the semi-finals next World Cup or at the next Euros, but I don't think anyone's going to be counting them out after what they've done in these last 2 tournaments.
Who we will hopefully see more of in the next World Cup is the African nations who've sort of asserted themselves on this tournament more so for sure than they have in any of the previous World Cups. Ash, what do you think that's down to, and take us through quite how groundbreaking it's been for African football?
Yeah, it's been brilliant. I mean, like Morocco obviously being the better of the teams. I feel like Tunisia beating France was huge. Also Cameroon beating Brazil, but I feel as well that they haven't done as well as expected. I think in the Tunisia win over France 1-0 in the final group game, France were like basically a completely different starting 11. There was a lot of youngsters in there with a lack of experience, so it wasn't a massive surprise that Tunisia got a result. Even though the big names came on in the end for France, they didn't play as if they were desperate for a result because they were through already. Same for Cameroon beating Brazil because it was just too late. Like it was a massive shock, but a big moment for them. They needed to be getting results earlier on in the group. Senegal did well to get to the last 16 despite missing Mane, but they were never going to beat England. And Ghana finishing bottom of the group was a disappointment, but then they were against some tough opposition in Portugal, South Korea, and Uruguay. So, it has been good for African teams in ways, but certainly Morocco leading the way there. I think the others had a couple of good results, but overall haven't gone as far as expected, I think, at the start of the tournament.
Okay, well, that's it from you two, I believe. Thanks for talking to Croatia and Morocco. We're going to move on to some of the other big shocks of the tournament next. And I've got Cam and Max joining me to talk about maybe some of the teams that they would have hoped to do better rather than those that have done better than they were expecting. So where are we going to start, guys? So many big teams have had a bit of a nightmare in Qatar, really.
Cool, yeah, you can sort of say that again, Matt. What a tournament for the upsets, for the minnows, some might say. I think me and Cam have had a look at some of the biggest upsets. There's probably, I'd say, 6 or 7 games that I think everyone was really shocked with. The likes of Japan doing very well, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Cameroon, Tunisia as well. And obviously we've touched on Morocco before. But I reckon we probably would start with maybe the sort of the big dogs and what's happened to them. And Cam's had a little look into that.
Yeah, as you said, it's been a pretty crazy tournament for upsets. I think the biggest thing with those heavy favourites has been complacency, to be honest. There's been a theme of the big sides not being able to put those minnows away and just showing a lack of sort of clinical edge. I remember back to that Japan-Spain game. There's almost sort of a laid-back mentality for Spain, sort of feeling like they had less pressure on having to finish chances. I mean, in 4 of those games, Japan, Spain, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Portugal, and Japan, Germany, the favourites went 1-0 up early and then sort of faltered towards the end and conceded 2 goals in quick succession. So I think just the underdogs have done much better than the big teams at capitalising on momentum and being able to score goals in quick succession.
Yeah, definitely. We're used to seeing Spain have that sort of relaxed, passing mentality, haven't we? But maybe that is what was ultimately their downfall. Not, like Cam said, not taking their chances. I mean, they've got, I suppose, Morata, a difficult striker to have at the best of times. He did actually okay this tournament, but to have not really an out-and-out striker might have been quite difficult for them. And we thought that, I think complacency was a big theme across all of these games. I mean, if we look at Japan's both wins against Spain and Germany, particularly in that Germany game, the Germans were all over the Japanese for a fair amount of the game. I mean, there were some big chances missed. Havertz had that disallowed goal from VAR, and Gundogan hit the post. But I think that was ultimately their downfall, was not taking those big chances. And look, the Japanese were brilliant on the counter. It was a relatively simple second goal. That sort of long ball down the middle for Asano over the top, and he slammed it home from the close range. So I think you can't, you can say they were complacent for the big sides there, but you also can't write off the desire and the belief that the sort of the smaller sides have shown this tournament. We've sort of had a look at some of the timings of the goals in a lot of these games. I mean, South Korea scored in the 90 plus 1 minute against Portugal. Japan's goal against Germany was in the 83rd. Cameroon's for Abubakar's goal against Brazil was in the 93rd minute. And obviously when Croatia shocked Brazil again with Bruno Petkovic, that was in the 117th. So it's huge amounts of belief for the smaller sides.
And if you had to pick out one game, have you decided on one that you thought was more of a shock than the rest?
I think that Saudi Arabia 2 goals in 5 minutes against Argentina early on in the tournament is the biggest one for me. Obviously, Argentina went up early and everyone just expected them to cruise. And then there was no pressure on Saudi Arabia, and that sort of came out of nowhere. That would be my pick.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree, to be honest. I had a little look at Saudi Arabia before the tournament, and no surprise, my star pick, Al Dossari, curling in a beauty. So, I'd like to take a bit of credit for that, but maybe not all of it. It's mostly him.
And do you think there's a reason why we saw quite a sudden end to the upsets as soon as it hit the knockout rounds?
I think...
sorry, you go, Cam.
I think just as you get into the knockout stages, the pressure it seems so simple, but the pressure the occasion, you have to step up to the occasion, and you can't be complacent in a knockout game where there's 90 minutes for you to survive. So I think it's just teams being comfortable in the group stages and then realising knockout stages you can't be off your game for even a minute.
Yeah, but then I suppose, Ashley touched on Morocco doing well, and
yeah,
they went pretty far. We kind of thought that, I think a lot of the smaller sides had similar tactics and set their team up in a similar way. If you look at Morocco as your example, and Japan did the same, and Tunisia when they snuck it against France, they sort of set up in that low block and they frustrate the opposition. But it's how hard they work as a team, and how aggressive they were in their defence of their side. And I think as well, that a lot of them had moments of individual brilliance from big players. I mean, if you look at Tunisia beating France, Wabi Kazri slotted a lovely goal. Aldosori's, obviously, we spoke about his strike against Argentina, and Abubakar had a lovely cushioned header to put Cameroon in front against Brazil. So it was, you can't just rely on sitting deep and allowing the opposition sides to dominate the game without having a little spark and a little bit of magic to take you through. And that's the beauty of the World Cup, I suppose.
And as a result of some of these shocks, Belgium, Germany, Brazil and Spain are all going to have new managers. Would you say that's harsh on those that have been sacked?
I don't think so. Biggest stage, you've got to show up on the biggest stage. And if you're losing to some teams you shouldn't be losing to, then I think it's completely fair enough. Yeah,
I'd agree. I mean, I think if you look at that Belgian side under Martinez, a serious crop of players for a while, third in the 2018 World Cup, and then crashing out in this one. I think his time was probably up. If you ask me, I think maybe they look somewhere else now. But yeah, I think Cam's right. I think if you come in with so much expectation as a big side and with having all the history that you might have, and if you do crash out in quite shocking circumstances, then there is probably going to be an inquest, and I think it's valid.
Yeah, well, I think that's fair enough, certainly. Thanks, both of you. We're going to move on and talk about the manager side of things more now. And to join me for that discussion, I've got Charlie and Abby coming in, hopefully. Hi, guys. So what do you think? Are the managers right to be gone? And what did you make of their side's performances on the whole?
I think if you look at the ones that have gone, some of them were already pre-arranged before the World Cup. So, for example, with Van Gaal leaving and Koeman coming in, that was always going to happen regardless of how well the Dutch did. And in terms of Roberto Martinez as well, it was very much his contract was expiring after the World Cup. And he after a poor tournament, it was no surprise at all that he was going to leave. In terms of like managers that have obviously subsequently left since their teams have been eliminated, look at Luis Enrique. I think going out in the last 16, no disrespect to Morocco, is considered a huge failure on Spain's behalf. So there's no real surprises to see him step down after that. With Luis de la Fuente coming in, the under-21s coach, don't really know anything about him, but kind of seemed a natural sort of change for Enrique to step down, considering Spain went out in the last 16. Fernando Santos, again, another one being relieved of his duties yesterday. Don't think you can have too many arguments about that. Should have done better with a very, very talented Portuguese squad. A lot of people tipping them to go quite deep into the tournament and to kind of put in such a disappointing performance against Morocco in the quarterfinals. I don't think there's any surprises that he's been relieved of his duties, but he is the only Portuguese manager in history to actually win a major trophy, so he will always have that to his name. And in terms of the other ones, Tite at Brazil, again, success is not black and white in terms of, you don't have to win to be successful, but when you're Brazil, anything other than a win in a World Cup, with many people considering them the favourites, then ultimately there was no choice for him but to step down. So you look at the ones that have left. Obviously, Paulo Bento left as well from South Korea. But I don't think there's any surprises there at all in any of the managers that have either decided to leave or been sacked from their duties.
Yeah, maybe just how long some of these managers have been in charge. Fernando Santos, 109 matches in charge. But obviously, like Charlie said, some of the performances weren't that great. Arguably, maybe Tite, Brazil, is the harshest. His side actually only lost 6 matches within 90 minutes during 81 games in charge. Like, if we're not measuring success as winning the World Cup, he certainly got some good performances out of that Brazil side.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask you, Abby, about Spain, because Luis Enrique seemed like one of the best qualified managers coming into this tournament. Why do you think Spain struggled to impose themselves so much?
I think maybe it wasn't. I'd like to think that Spain's failure wasn't as much as themselves as maybe just a very special Moroccan side. And I think there are a lot of whispers about Enrique, and his replacement obviously is the under-21s coach and kind of got the same path as Gareth Southgate, come from the under-21s into the head coach role. So maybe they'll be more successful with him.
Yeah, well, you obviously mentioned Gareth Southgate. We're going to go on to talk about England later, but one of the key discussions around him has been whether it's important that a national team's manager is from that nation. What do you think, and has there been a theme in this tournament to suggest that that's a benefit or not?
I think if you look at international football as a whole, it's very much one nation's best against another nation's best. So why shouldn't that then also apply to the managers as it applies to the players? But I also think on the flip side, if you've got a great pool of managers to choose from, for example, like a Germany where you've got the likes of Thomas Tuchel, Klopp, Hansi Flick, Joachim Löw in the past, you've got a top level managers to pick from within your national pool. Whereas if you look at other countries where the quality in depth of coaching is not great, then obviously you would look elsewhere to bring in the best available to give you the best possible chance. So for me, whilst in an ideal situation, you would want to have it from your own country, if you haven't got that depth of quality in coaches, then I see no issue with going elsewhere to try and bring someone in. And ultimately, if a foreign manager were to win a major trophy for your nation, I don't think anyone's going to care what nationality they are.
Just to play devil's advocate with Charlie, I obviously think it's a bit unreasonable to suggest that they can't be from another country. But, international football is arguably different to domestic football. You're playing with passion, your love for your country. And, the Moroccan side that I've just mentioned with Walid Regragui leading it, they're kind of like the epitome of this, is that he has united a team of dual nations, something that he is himself, they share common ground and played for the pride of their country. And also it's these, the smaller footballing nations that have to turn to foreign managers if they haven't got the domestic managers with the same prestige as other countries. But, Regragui wasn't known outside Morocco, but he had a lot of success. He won the Batola, the Moroccan league. And so, there's an argument to say that there is not really as much success. No World Cups have been won by a foreign manager, and I think the stats are telling that, and in this World Cup, that there are only 9 foreign managers out of the 32, and the one that made the furthest was Paulo Bento, South Korea. Round of 16, but he's been sacked.
Yeah, and in terms of the 2 finalists, not only managers from the nation which they're managing, but also former players. Do you think that's another important factor?
Possibly, I guess. Like just on, I've forgotten his name now. The Scaloni, the Argentinian manager. Pretty certain, this could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain the only reason they appointed him was because they paid so much money paying off Jorge Sampaoli that they had to get the cheapest option in, and it was him, and it's actually turned out all right. So, I mean, again, this is his first job in football, and he's done phenomenally well. He's got a great squad of players available to him. But I don't know. It's interesting to see that, as you say, no foreign managers won the World Cup. You look at the nations now, former players, they know what it takes to play at that level. They're fully embedded within the ethos of the country, within the ethos of the team. And that does make a big difference. I think, particularly at international level, when you've got to get so immersed within the culture, it makes a massive difference being from that country. But it's not something that, you can't learn if you are a foreign manager. Obviously, you're never going to quite get it the same as if you're from that country in the first place.
I think Charlie and I were also saying that, when you're measuring this, you can't really say success is, how far you get in a World Cup or winning it. Because this means so much different things, success to different nations, especially if it's the smaller nations or not successful nations that are turning to the foreign managers. I think the most obvious example of that is, South Korea 20 years ago, Gus Hiddink leading them to the semi-finals. He became the first ever person to be granted South Korean citizenship. The stadium was named after him. He's got free flights for life and a villa for life. It can mean a lot to different nations, as long as you can understand the cultural nuances and things like that. I don't think there is any reason why you can't have foreign managers that are successful.
Yeah, and success does mean different things to different nations. Perhaps it's been an unsuccessful tournament for England. To discuss that, we're going to sub you out, Abby, so thank you for joining us, and bring in Dom, who's our very own Mr. England, Southwest Londoner. And yeah, I guess to start, given that we're on managers, what do we expect Southgate's future is going to look like, and do we think he should stay?
Charlie, you can go ahead with that one.
I think so. Southgate's future, in terms of, he's earned the right to decide what he wants to do, given what he's done within the major tournaments. You only have to look at, the last few tournaments, a semi-final of the World Cup, the Euros final, and then a quarter-final in this World Cup. He's reinstalled the belief in England fans and in the squad that, we can actually win a tournament rather than dreading international football. We look back to the dark days, 2010 World Cup, shambolic. Going out to Iceland, 2014 wasn't much better. There's a real feel-good factor, and there's a club vibe around the camp now, whereas beforehand, when you had England's quote-unquote previous golden generation, you've got like a Liverpool table, a United table, a Chelsea table. They're all sitting on their separate tables. No one's kind of mixing together. There's a real good vibe around the place, and there's a belief that we can win tournaments. And the players really enjoy actually going and joining up for international duty, which has not always been the case. And I think you can definitely tell that, we're getting unparalleled media access to England camps now, which we never used to get in the past. So for me, those are all massive positives. But then on the flip side as well, which I'm sure we'll get into, is the fact that I look at it and I think, right, England beat the teams that we should beat, which is fair. And then whenever we play like kind of a top team, like a France or an Italy or whoever it happens to be, we just always fall short. Now, I know obviously, in football, you can always be on either side of fine margins, but I've just kind of noticed in the last few tournaments, England are always on the wrong side of the fine margins. Now, I'm not saying that's solely down to the manager, but when you really get into it, the nitty gritty in these kind of key moments in big football matches, you can look at France the other day, defending world champions. The fact that there's even belief that England could win this game is a massive step in the right direction. But we arguably, I know no one cares that England were probably the better side because we're out, but you look at it and you think we actually were the better side against France for large parts of the game. But when it really mattered, we couldn't take advantage of it. Whereas if you look at the French, for example, they're filled with winners, not only in the team, but also on the dugout with Didier Deschamps, who not only has won the World Cup himself as a player and a manager, he's got winning experience at club level as well in France. And you just look at it, when you really need it, I look to the England bench, and I just think Southgate's done so much good for this country, but is he really the guy to take that final step? Has he got that tactical nuance to make bold decisions in games that are going to kind of change the outcome? So look, I'm not saying I feel it probably is time for a change, but I fully understand that if the manager's going to stay English, then it has to be Southgate, because there's no one else better qualified. That's a British manager to do it. But if the FA were open to going foreign and open to bringing a top level manager in, then I just think, yes, you could lose a little bit of that squad harmony, but I would sacrifice that in order to win something.
I would say on that, England have obviously gone out in the quarter-final here, and that's statistically the worst tournament that England have played under Southgate's stewardship. They reached the semi-finals of the World Cup in 2018 and the final of the European Championships last summer. So a quarter-final showing in Qatar is the worst. But I actually still think I'm still seeing progression and progress from this team, when I didn't necessarily expect that it was necessarily likely, given how well England did at the Euros. What I liked about England at the World Cup was that they scored so many. The last World Cup was that they scored so many goals. Okay, a lot of them were from set pieces, but taking on set pieces and trying to get better at them shows sensible coaching, in my opinion, because you might as well try and maximise your opportunities from corners and free kicks and things like that. At the Euros, England kept so many clean sheets. By the end of the tournament, Jordan Pickford had kept a clean sheet in 5 of the 7 games he'd played in, and we'd only conceded 2 goals. And that sort of control of matches is what international football takes. International football isn't a this way and that club football style of type of sport, really. It's much more pragmatic. You need to get the big moments right. I think broadly speaking, at the Euros, England did. And at this World Cup, England scored loads of goals, conceded very few goals at the other end. And actually, the way they went out was different, I think. I agree with Charlie that when England have played under Southgate in the knockout rounds, the teams that it suddenly becomes less obvious whether they'll beat or not, they have come unstuck. Croatia were relatively evenly matched in 2018 with England, and they won. Italy were relatively evenly matched in the final last year, and they won. And France were relatively evenly matched with us this year, and they won. But the difference is, England let Croatia walk all over them, despite starting well in that semi-final 4 years ago. Last year, they did exactly the same against Italy. They scored 58 seconds in. I think arguably that's too early to score an important game. You can plan all you want for the biggest game of your lives, but you never expect to go ahead in that game 58 seconds in. And then what do you decide to do? And you could literally watch Southgate and the players sort of freezing and not knowing whether to go for the jugular, or to hold on to what they had. And in the end, that was that Italy had the beating of them. They encroached into England inch by inch throughout the game, and in the end, they were completely dictating the game. This was completely different. Against France, England were by a long way the best team, I think. Look, France had a few moments. Tchouameni's goal didn't come against the run of play. It was following the run of play. I think it's fair to say France started the better team. England looked a little bit nervous, but by the end of the game, you'd be struggling to find anyone who thought that France played better. And Harry Maguire was interviewed about this after the game, and his words were, "All you can ever do is take care of the result. That's all you can take care of the performance. That's all you can take care of." And he's right. You cannot prepare. You cannot prepare to score more goals than the opposition. That is not realistic. You can prepare to play better, and usually, Morocco haven't played better than a lot of the teams they've played, but they've managed to get through. So there are anomalies. But broadly speaking, if you play better than your opponents, more often than not, you will win the game. And England, they did get unlucky against France. France went on the counter-attack twice, scored twice, and knocked them out. But I'm not sure there's a huge amount more that England or indeed Southgate could have done in that quarter-final game. I think broadly speaking, it feels outcome bias and kind of hindsight bias to suggest that there were things that should have been done differently. Because I look at that performance and I think that was brave. I think it was courageous. But it wasn't brave and plucky without any outcome. England were actually good. They weren't just trying to be good. They did play well.
So we've obviously seen the questions being asked about Southgate. No one's asking whether the players are good enough. Do you think we're entitled to see England win a trophy with this group of players?
Yeah, sorry, I was quickly say, yeah, I think absolutely. I think, you look at the squads just at this World Cup, and maybe not first 11s, but in terms of strength and depth, I'm looking at the squads, and I think England second to none in terms of the strength of the squad and the options from the bench. You can look at England's bench. I know France have got players missing, Pogba, Benzema, Kante, and whatnot, and that would obviously bolster their squad up. But in terms of what we've seen at this World Cup, I think England have the best squad. And there's no right in football to expect to win, but this group of players is absolutely good enough to win a trophy, and we've seen that we are getting closer and closer. But we still need that little bit to take the final step. And I just look at it, and I think the final step is kind of, for me, comes down to two things. It's elite level mentalities within the players. I look at the England players, and yes, there's players that have been part of phenomenally successful club teams. Kyle Walker, to name one. But then I look at
Henderson as well. Jordan Henderson.
Yeah, Henderson as well. There's winners in there. There's winning mentalities. But then I also look at it, and I look at someone like Harry Kane, who is talismanic to this England team. He's not won anything in his career. And I'm not saying that's like a problem necessarily, but when you look to the big moments, you need players that have been there and done it and won stuff. And I'm not blaming Kane for missing this penalty, but ultimately for me, I look at Harry Kane's big game record and what he's done over his career at Tottenham and over his England career. Yes, he's level with Wayne Rooney as the all-time goal scorer, but ultimately for me, big moments in big games, Harry Kane, I'm sorry, I look back at it, he's not a big game player. And I just think England need a few more big game players and a bit more of a killer instinct, a ruthlessness, like we saw with France. Exactly, on the back foot for large parts of that game. But 2 moments of quality and whatnot, or moments of ruthlessness, bang, and they win the game. So I think that's for me what's missing from England is a more elite level mindsets from the players. And for potentially as well, for me, I think Southgate's done great, but I just can't help but feel, I wonder what some of these situations would have been like if we'd had someone like, for example, a Thomas Tuchel in the dugout, someone that is known to be an elite level tactician and a top level manager. I'm not saying it would have been different, but it leaves a sort of a big kind of what if question if it had been someone else. I'm not saying it's necessarily the right answer, but I also feel that perhaps maybe it's time to see if that is right.
I think you're right to mention the mentality of the players, Charlie. I would say I have seen growth in that, though. England went to the World Cup in Russia, and their aim was to win one knockout game. And after beating Colombia on penalties, they'd done that. And from then on, it was sort of how far can we get? A bit like the same mentality, frankly, that Morocco will have had through this World Cup. They weren't planning to win knockout games. It's for the whole time, it's been how far can we get? So England have grown from that, and they headed into this World Cup they truly believed they'd win this World Cup. I have absolutely no doubt about that. Those players were in the dressing room, and they've talked about it before the France game, in halftime at the France game. They absolutely believed they would win the World Cup. And whether they actually win it or not is almost not the point. The point is, if you truly convince yourself that you can win a tournament, that shows growth in belief, I think. In terms of Matt's original question, should we feel entitled that our players should win something with this generation? Charlie, you said that these players are absolutely good enough to win something, and they are. But there's a difference between your players being good enough and you being entitled to watch them do it. I don't think any fan base should ever feel entitled to watch their team win anything. You can be the best team in a tournament, but or a league season, but the minutiae and the moments in football dictate it for you. Do you remember that season a couple of years ago? I mean, think about how random tournaments are. They always say that, don't they? The league doesn't lie because it's 38 games. It doesn't allow for random teams to kind of win a few knockout games and suddenly they're in the semi-finals. But a couple of years ago, 38-game season, if John Stones doesn't clear the ball an inch or two off the line, then maybe Liverpool win the Premier League, and in the end, Manchester City do on goal difference. So if that's allowed in a 38-game season, and we let people off, we should definitely be doing that in tournaments which only have 7 matches. Is this generation of players good enough to win a trophy? Absolutely it is. but there are other teams around who are as good as well. I think we need to get out of a mindset of thinking just because we're better now than we have been in the past, we therefore deserve to win trophies. No, we deserve to challenge for trophies. We deserve to do however well we play. Everything is dictated by how well you play, and England play extremely well. I think they would have won the World Cup if they'd beaten France, and it's a shame that they didn't. But I'm not sure we need to go quite so far into the root and branch review, the inquest that we used to do after tournaments. After you've lost to Iceland, you need to do an inquest. But after you've dominated France, had 61% of the ball and ended up losing on the counter-attack, I'm not sure that deserves much of an inquiry, really.
Well, very interesting indeed. I still don't know if we came to a conclusion on Southgate, so we'll have to leave a question mark over his job. But that is where we're going to end the England discussion. Thanks, both of you, for contributing to that. And we're now going to move to a bit of a broader look back at the rest of the tournament, focusing, though, on the stats. And so to join me for that is Paddy, Elise, and Alp across their various locations. So, guys, take it away. Stats. What's been going on?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going. So we're gonna kind of bring in a little bit more of a fun segment, I suppose, and like you said, take a little look back at some of the stats, some of the great performances across the tournament. So to start with, we've got a mock the week style. If this is the answer, what's the question round? World Cup themed. So, Alp, do you want to take it away with the first stat?
I would like to. All right, let's start with our first little stat here. If the answer is 26, what is the question?
I'm going to go for the oldest age it's acceptable to have a crush on Gavi. No?
Not any guesses?
I don't know. I don't know. What, you're going to have to reveal it to me.
The question is the number of shots Germany had against Japan in the group stage match that they lost.
An iconic moment.
One of the biggest moments in the entirety of the tournament, of course. I was about to say the over the line thing, but that's actually from the Spain game. My apologies.
So the second one we have is, if the answer is 7, what's the question?
How many penalties England fans think they should have been awarded against France last Saturday?
Only 7. I figured that number would be a lot more then.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bad guess, hey, Alp.
I'd maybe think the squad number Bukayo Saka should have been given for England ahead of this tournament, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah. The answer is, the question is actually, so what's the number of nils in this World Cup? And you compare that to Russia in 2018 when there was only one goalless match.
That was the France-Denmark game from the group stages back then. And we had most of the goalless games during the group stage as well, which a lot of them in early on as well, which we thought set the scene for what was going to be a very boring World Cup, though it ended up being a bit different from that by the end of it. Anyway, moving on to our third stats. If the answer is 35.7, what is the question?
The number of physical altercations had in the Belgian dressing room on game day in the group stage.
Anything
maybe the expected goals that England had against France.
Matt, you're getting involved. I love it.
Well, in fact, the question was the speed recorded by Kamaluddin Sulemana from Ghana, which was recorded the fastest speed above any player in the World Cup, 35.7 kilometers per hour, which is frighteningly fast, considering I can barely walk 2 kilometers per hour myself.
Who would you guys have said before knowing that was the fastest player in the World Cup, just from watching
it? Your instinct is to go for Mbappe, but I think he's the second fastest at the tournament. I think he's literally 0.5 of a kilometre per hour slower than Suleimana. But hey,
Carl Walker's not that far behind either.
True. I mean, I would have put my money on Olivier Giroud personally, but I mean, that's just me, I guess.
All right, so the next one, number 4. If the answer is 210 million, what's the question?
I'm going to go for the number of different dance routines Brazil had prepared before their 4-1 win over South Korea.
Matt?
Nothing from me on this one. That's too big a number to comprehend for me.
So the question's, what's the difference in population between Croatia and Brazil? Croatia obviously knocking Brazil out. And so the difference is between 3.8 million in Croatia and 214 million in Brazil. So it just goes to show how crazy it is that they can produce so many athletes, so many world-class athletes across so many different sports as well.
Yeah, we've seen plenty of situations where a country significantly smaller than the giant that they're facing ends up coming up on top. I'm sure Iceland knows about that quite well, in fact.
Right.
All right. And our last stat, interesting stat that we've managed to pull out from the archives, is if the answer is 0, what is the question?
Is it the number of women and people of colour in the State 974 Stadium press box?
Ooh.
No, that's not got as good a reception as I'd have hoped. But hey, the truth hurts sometimes, guys.
We'll be talking more about the controversial elements of this World Cup later, but what is the question?
The question is the number of English and Welsh fans that were arrested at the World Cup.
Yeah, this is the first time at a World Cup that no English and Welsh fans have been arrested. So that's probably down to the fact there's no booze, maybe.
Yeah, it's the one positive news, at least for Welsh fans, throughout the entirety of the World Cup, considering the less said about their actual team, the better.
Well, I was going to say they were barely there. They probably didn't have time to get arrested.
Flights to Qatar are quite expensive as well. I don't know how much of the sort of
very true.
Accrington Stanley faithful are going to be flying out. But
yeah. Right, shall we move on then to the awards? We've got a couple of alternative awards to give out. So if Alp, you want to kick us off with the first award?
Yes, I gladly would like to. So our first award of the day /evening/tournament is the Louis Suarez Award for Dark Arts Mastery.
Yeah, so this one is, as it says on the tin. Go on then, Paddy.
No. Take it away. I got our structure all confused. Take it away.
So it's basically what it says on the tin. It's just who use their abilities to get under the skin of their opponents the most. So go on, Paddy. It's you now.
Brilliant. Thank you. Just keeping you on your toes there, Elise. Yeah, we've got 3 nominees, Matt, for you to decide from for the Housery Award, I should say. Leandro Paredes for booting the ball at the Dutch subs bench from point-blank range in their quarter-final clash. Jawad El Yamik for kissing Pepe's shiny bald head after he missed a header against Morocco when Morocco were a goal up. And lastly, nominee number 3 is Emi Martinez for cutting some shapes in the shootout after he made 2 saves from the first 2 pens. Thoughts?
Well, I think in order to award such a prestigious award, I'm first going to have to get my attire appropriate. Let me just try and hopefully put this on. Oh, this could have gone better. There we go. I think there's obviously 2 nominees from the same game, the Netherlands-Argentina game, but I'm going to have to say Jawad El Yamik has come away with this for me. Firstly, because it is just a great bit of dark arts to kiss Pepe's head after he's missed a pretty decent chance for Portugal to equalise in that game, but also just because it was Pepe that was the recipient of such an act. Someone who's so known for the dark arts himself made it that bit better. So yeah, Jawad El Yamik will get it for me.
Yeah. Sometimes it's the most subtle and gentle parts of Calgary, isn't it? Yeah.
Sometimes simplicity truly is best when it comes to just making your opponent's life as miserable as possible, especially when they've just missed a chance to equalize for their team in a game that, let's be honest, they should have won, and they completely bottled it.
It was a multifaceted, gentle kiss, wasn't it? Many layers to it. Very, very much, very oxymoronic in its nature, but boy, was it beautiful.
Right, should we move on to the second award then, Al? Take it away.
Yes, indeed. Our second award of the tournament, given by us lovely journalists here, is the Sports Washing Facilitator Award.
Yeah. So again, another one that just does what it says on the tin. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion around this tournament, and there will be later on in this stream about sports washing and whether it succeeded in this tournament. But this is mostly for a lot of British pundits actually that chose to go out there or take money from the Qataris in some sort of way. So how do you want to take us through our nominees?
Yeah, 3 nominees for this one once more, Matt. So listen up. We've got, first of all, I don't know if you've ever seen The Hood from Thunderbirds. Gianni Infantino just reeks of it, both in visage, presentation, nature of character. Slightly niche reference, I know, but Gianni Infantino is our first nominee for this category. Up next, previously oft-proclaimed gay icon and grade A sellout David Beckham. And round 3, we have Mr. Manchester United himself, Gary Neville, Mr. Documentary, Qatari admirer, have I got news for you? Self-embarrassment. So yeah, there's your options: Infantino, Beckham, and Neville.
Well, like you alluded to, all of them have been picked up for their various contributions to sports washing. So that's good to see at least. But I do think Gianni Infantino's not quite had his fair share of backlash for quite how astonishing his support of the Qatari regime has been. So I'm going to award the Sports Washing Facilitator Award to the FIFA president.
I think that's a very good choice. Honestly, I feel like had he not been one of the nominations already, we probably would have named the award after him. So I think it's quite fitting that he wins this after some stern competition.
Our third award then.
All right, so our third award is, let's talk more about certain teams that have done a bit of a nice performance throughout the tournament. We have the Under the Radar Team of the Tournament Award.
Yeah, so we'll be basically nominating teams for this that we feel performed well or had particularly great moments that perhaps went a little bit under the radar, didn't get as much press attention as some of the other countries.
Because they were all overshadowed by Morocco.
It's interesting you should say that, out, because Morocco sort of quietly went through the tournament, but these guys made a real splash in the start of the group stages. So first up, Matt, you've got Japan, who beat both Spain and Germany to top Group E amid a lot of goal line technology, uproar and hoo-ha. Australia, the Socceroos, their country of Aussie rules and cricket fans crawled out of the rafters to watch their team make it to the last 16 after beating Denmark. That was great to see. Good scenes down under. And then South Korea, who infamously came from behind to beat Portugal, which was so rigorously followed by us in the news associates press room, to knock out both Uruguay and Ghana on the final day of the group. So those are your 3 options, Matthew.
Well, I actually had Japan down pre-tournament as a potential shock, so I was disappointed to only see them get as far as the round of 16, so I couldn't possibly give them this award. Australia, very impressive, but I don't know if it's got more to do with Denmark being bad, so I'm going to have to give it to South Korea for that remarkable last game win over Portugal.
Good choice.
Yeah, very good choice. And of course, South Korea had won that game basically at the 90th minute against Portugal team, which still had quite a few of their top players playing. And of course, during that process, that one goal was enough for them to just barely squeak on past Uruguay on goal difference. So it was a monumental occasion for the South Koreans, both player, staff, and fans, who celebrated even minutes after the game, their own game had finished, waiting for the result of the other one. And the jubilation was quite fantastic to see.
Yeah.
And now let's move on to award number 4 of the tournament. We're going to stick with the similar vein here, and we're going to go with the under-radar player of the tournament. So we have our...
Yeah, well, again, just as it says with the teams, just players that didn't quite stand out, but maybe just did little bits behind the scenes and on a pitch for their country, maybe didn't take the glory, but put in a really good performance.
Yeah, so your 3 nominees, they've all had their names previously mentioned over the past 55 minutes and 51 seconds of this stream. Up first, Azzedine Ounahi, playing third tier French football last year, had a great World Cup, didn't he? Dominik Livakovic, goalie for Dinamo Zagreb. He kept Brazil out of the semi-finals in that penalty shootout. No mean feat, of course, against the Samba boys. And then third and finally, Nicolas Otamendi. How's he still going? He's a bit of a dinosaur at this point. But hey, played nearly every minute for Argentina. And incidentally today, the Times has described him as back from the dead. So he's cutting a little bit of slack, but proving us all wrong. Those are your options, Matt.
Yeah, well, like you said, mentioned before a lot of them, but Nicolas Otamendi really has got under the radar for me. So I'm going to give it to him. Really, a real comeback this tournament. Not someone that I would have expected to be starting in this Argentina team, especially this late in his career. So, yeah, well done, Nicolas.
Yep. So the award indeed goes to someone who is basically a zombie for this tournament, and credit to him, he's been fantastic. Though I think most of us were probably still confused why he was playing after the first 2 games, and I think we've all been proven wrong at this point. And now, award number 5, a bit of a more of a personal award, I think we can say, from us here in the office. We have the Angela Cato Award for the shortest hand.
I'm not even going to try and explain what this means, so I think we just go straight to the nomination.
I think we can just go straight to our nominees, or I guess single nominee here.
Yeah, Alp, you've created a real sort of enigmatic award here. It's something that I'm really impressed by. It doesn't give Matt a lot of choice because there is obviously only one winner, Mr. Jordan Pickford. Shortest hand, shortest arm. Jordan Thickford, I like to call him. He's got a magnificent posterior. But yeah, if he had longer arms, he may well have been able to save that Tchouaméni screamer in the first half on Saturday. But hey, we love him. Has he got another World Cup in him? Maybe not. Is it time for Messrs Ramsdale or Pope, probably the former, to step up into his boots? I don't know, but he's the winner of the, as Alp has dubbed, the Angela Cato Award for the shortest hand. Your creativity astounds me, sir.
Thank you. I pride myself on my creativity and originality when it comes to these. All right, and now to move on to our final award of this section is the Lifetime Achievement Award. Elise?
Again, really doesn't need much explaining, does it? Just someone who has, come out of this World Cup with outstanding achievements during their lifetime.
Yeah, some good options for this, good milestones. We didn't really touch on them in the stat part of this feature, which feels like it might be dragging a little bit at this point. But this is the final award, Matt. 3 options for you. Neymar equaled Pele's goal-scoring record on the international stage, 77 strikes. Not bad. Second up, Monsieur Olivier Giroud, breaking Thierry Henry's record for goals for the French national team. What a player. When we look back on that highlight reel, we'll be speaking of a player of some caliber, which is far removed from the bloke who couldn't convert on some of Mesut Ozil's deliveries in 2016 to painful as I'm sure you'll relate, Matt, as a fellow Gooner. And then Louis van Gaal, what a stat, never losing a World Cup game. Was that in 90 minutes or?
I believe it is in under 90.
Yeah.
So in any 120 minutes as well, because the only times he's lost would be in a penalty shootouts, both cases in 2014 and this year, in fact, both to Argentina.
Well, there you go. Van Gaal, Neymar, and Monsieur, I can't change that I'm gorgeous, Olivier Giroud.
Yeah, three very deserving nominees. That Van Gaal stat is massively impressive, and obviously equaling Pele's record is a huge achievement for Neymar. But I will give it to Olivier Giroud. I'm a huge fan of his, despite arguably him stealing an Arsenal Premier League title away from me single-handedly. And not only is he just a deserving winner in his own right, he also brings me very nicely to the end of this segment and into the next. So thanks all three of you for joining us on stream to take us through this segment. I've enjoyed it. Some good awards. But we all know the real big award, as I should probably take my bow tie off because it doesn't really do it justice. The World Cup final, of course, will be won on Sunday. And joining me to discuss some of the potential ramifications of that 90 minutes and who we think will win, I've got Alex and Oscar coming in.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hi.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on. What do we think? Give me the lowdown on each side shaping up for the final.
Well, I mean, in the last kind of hour, we've heard of some sort of bug that's gone down in the French camp that obviously stopped Mr. Rabiot from playing the semi-final on Wednesday, and that's apparently reached the likes of Konate and Varane. And so there's obviously a bit of unrest in that sense in the French camp leading up to the final. While in terms of Argentina, we haven't really heard anything except the players are training and just looking forward to the game of their lives, pretty much.
It might just be that Pepe was right, that they're ready to hand Argentina the trophy and it's man-made, or it could just be that they've got a bad cold. We don't really know the full details. It seems to have affected France much more than Argentina. No reports of any illnesses in that camp.
Well, one of the things that's interested me, and if he's not been around the squad, certainly won't have a cold. Recently, there's been a lot of discussion around Karim Benzema potentially coming back to the French team for the final. What's the outlook on that? How likely is that looking?
I'm not completely sure, because when Didier Deschamps was asked about it after the game, after the semi-final, he was very tight-lipped. He didn't want to actually talk about it at all. So we don't really know. What we do know is Olivier Giroud, as the starting striker for France, has been incredibly successful, not just in this tournament, obviously, but in 2018. And we've not seen the same type of success with Benzema up front for France, even though, of course, he is the Ballon d'Or winner. He's an incredible player, one of the best strikers of his generation. When I've watched France, they seem more dynamic. Mbappe seems to play at his best with Olivier Giroud. So, I mean, of course, that's a storyline ahead of the final on Sunday, but I don't think it's like Benzema's going to start, because they've been so successful with Giroud and the team.
Yeah, they managed to win the final, obviously, in 2018 with Giroud. How close are the French team to the one which won 4 years ago?
Well, they're different. I mean, it's important to say kind of before that they are missing players that from the 2018 team that would have played, like Kante and Pogba. But it kind of just shows the strength and depth that France now have in the last kind of 3 or 4 years. I mean, you've still got important players like Lloris, like Varane, like Mbappe, like Griezmann and Giroud that are part of that. But of course, you have the difference, kind of the youth of Tchouaméni, that's part of the midfield, perhaps as like a replacement for Kante. I guess you don't have Ntiti anymore. You've got the likes of Konate, or of course you've got Saliba, who hasn't actually played a minute, but you've got Konate, you've got Upamecano. who played obviously the quarterfinal in the round of 16 match. But it's kind of interesting the use of Griezmann, of course, in comparison to 4 years ago. And obviously in 2016 in the Euros, he won player of the tournament, kind of more as a striker, as a forward. And this time he was almost been playing as kind of the most advanced of a midfield three, but still showing incredible kind of tenacity to win the ball back. I think he's very high up in terms of the stats of possession recoveries and distance covered. He's had an incredible tournament because he's kind of shown a side to his game that I think a lot of us haven't really seen before from him. And his footballing intelligence, especially in the semi-final and the quarterfinal against England, to kind of make the right decision. It was apparent that he was one of the best players on the pitch in both those matches. So he's having a fantastic tournament. Certainly for me, along with Lionel Messi and Kylian Mbappe, as the three best players of this tournament. But overall, just the 2018 team, I think perhaps was a bit stronger, probably had more of a kind of solid base. But, 4 years later, they've got players out. I haven't even talked about the likes of Nkunku, who obviously got injured before the tournament started. It just shows the strength and depth that this French squad has.
Yeah, and they're obviously going to be coming up against arguably the best player in the world, best player ever, some would say. Oscar, do you think there's any question if Argentina win the final over Messi's status?
I don't think so, no. But arguably, for I will include myself in that he's already, that whether he wins or not, a very emotional monologue was said to him by an Argentinian journalist after the semi-final win, which was basically the Argentinian fans don't care if you win or not. You're the best player that's ever been, and thanked him for his contribution to Argentinian football. I think he's brilliant, and I think the semi-final was magic. It was so good to watch. It's a sort of performance that you watch him play and you go, yeah, this is why I love football. This is why I enjoy football, because he was just brilliant. And if you sort of, a nice way to assess his legacy is to compare him to Maradona before him. He obviously won in 1986 as a 25-year-old. Messi's 35. But Maradona scored 5 goals in that, and Messi's currently on 5 goals in this tournament. We see that sort of shift, and for some people in Argentina before the Copa America, it was said that Maradona is still the best in the world because Messi's not won on the international stage. Messi's won the Copa America. He's undoubtedly the greatest, if not one of the greatest players ever, and that's now sort of switched, and you'll see more people saying that yes, of course, Messi's the greatest Argentinian footballer and the greatest in the world.
And even though it might seem like it at times, Messi can't do it all by himself. What are the other factors which contribute to Argentina's success?
Well, I think in much the same way as a lot of these tournament wins, they've been climbing that momentum mountain the whole tournament, where a slow start with the loss to Saudi Arabia, and then you sort of build it up from there. They were described as a championship level team in the first half against Mexico by Roy Keane. Harsh critic, but they were nervous and they were playing with fear. And then you've seen them get out their group relatively comfortable in the end and play Australia and make it look not as comfortable as it probably should have been. And then they went and they beat the Dutch on penalties. And I think, obviously, they then swept aside Croatia. The Dutch victory is what I think we'll look back on if they win the World Cup and say that's a moment that was huge and seismic. They played with passion. They played with a bit of anger. They were clearly fired up by Louis van Gaal's pre-match talk. Messi uncharacteristically, calling out opposition players and referees and Louis van Gaal himself after the game. You don't see that often. Emi Martinez, you do see that often from, and so it wasn't unsurprising that he was telling Louis van Gaal to keep his mouth shut. That's they've come to expect from Emi Martinez. But there's a collective there. They've got young players in Julian Alvarez and Enzo Fernandez who look to know that there is a future after Messi. It's not just a Messi side and then it will stop as soon as he retires in what will probably be his last Cup. And they're playing with that collectiveness that makes the national team so good under quite an English manager. They're coming together at just the right time and peaking at the right time, and yeah, I can see them going and beating France in the final now.
Well, to find out how that might be possible and how the two teams are going to shape up against each other, we're hopefully about to be joined by Ollie, who can take us through the tactical battles and some of the key players we can discuss as well on Sunday's game. So, Ollie, what do you think will be the difference and where will the game be won and lost?
I think the first tactical talking point that we've got to discuss is how Argentina are going to line up defensively. I think the manager Lionel Scaloni has shown real sort of tactical flexibility in over the course of the tournament. He's lined up predominantly in the 4-4-2, allowing sort of Lionel Messi to have more of a free role alongside an out-and-out number 9. But he's also lined up with a 4-3-3, a 4-2-3-1, and even in the quarterfinal, he lined up with a 5-3-2. So I think that 5-3-2, it's allowed a lot more defensive security, especially when trying to cover those, cover the channels that opposition strikers are trying to spin into, as Memphis Depay and Steven Bergwijn tried to do for the Netherlands in the quarterfinal. The back five, as Gareth Southgate chose not to do against France in the quarterfinals, could be sort of a good foil to deal with Kylian Mbappe. We've spoken about it before with England, because Argentina don't have this, that athletic equal that England and Morocco did to deal with Kylian Mbappe down that left hand side. England had Kyle Walker, Morocco had Achraf Hakimi. So and Noel Molina, for all his good going forward, is not as good going backwards and facing his own goal. So I think when it comes to Argentina setting up defensively, I would expect them to line up in a 5-3-2, similar to what they did against the Netherlands, and bring in an extra centre-back. That will be Lisandro Martinez of Manchester United, who will be slotting onto that left-hand side of that back three to support Nico Tagliafico down that left-hand side to help him against Ousmane Dembele. And Molina will be supported by Christian Romero sliding across the right-hand side, where he's obviously a lot more comfortable having played on the right side of a 3 for Antonio Conte's Tottenham Hotspur. For France, I think it's a lot more predictable in how they'll line up, predominantly in possession. I think it's very much going to be that 4-2-3-1, although, Alex, as you alluded to, the virus that's going around the French squad at the moment might well mean that there are a couple of casualties, but I don't think that will necessarily be the case. I think Adrien Rabiot will come in to play that little bit more box-to-box role, to replace Youssouf Fofana, who I didn't think was particularly great in the semi-final. And I think it will be a continued pairing of Rafa Varane and Ibrahima Konate to sort of add that recovery pace at the back for France. But I don't think that France will necessarily, go out and try and press Argentina high. They've not done that the entirety of this tournament. They've decided to, sit back in more of a 4-4-2. Antoine Griezmann has dropped in with Adrien Rabiot shifting leftwards to create more of a 4-4-2 block. And let their opposition come onto them to try and really hit them on the break with their individual quality and their pace.
So you said that Christian Romero is probably going to have a lot of responsibility in dealing with Mbappe. Who's going to have, on the French side of things, the responsibility of taking control of Messi, or do you think it'll be a collective issue?
So this is the thing with Argentina. Argentina haven't really had to deal with. This is the thing with France. France haven't really had to deal with anyone like Lionel Messi as of yet, and it's a completely different challenge when you're having to deal with probably the best of all time. And especially if Argentina play a 5-3-2 and Messi's got that free role, it's quite difficult to just deploy a simple man marking system. I don't necessarily think that, sticking Adrien Rabiot or Aurelien Tchouameni is necessarily going to be sufficient for France. I think it's going to be very much position dependent on wherever Messi goes. You allocate a body in that particular part of the pitch to follow him. So, say for example, he's trying to inhabit sort of that right half space, coming in off that right onto his left. Then I think it's probably a case of either Rabiot or Lucas Hernandez tracking him either inside or out. And obviously, if he pops up either on the left or more in the center, then it's more a case of Jules Koundé coming in and sort of inversing and sitting on him, or Aurélien Tchouameni sort of just in there and trying to cut off all those sort of more central paths to goal. So obviously, picking up Messi when he picks up those pockets is France's real defensive priority in that regard.
So after discussing that, do you think it'll be a good game?
I hope it will be a good game. I think it will be cagey in the first half an hour, as most World Cup finals usually are. But I think that, well, as I said, it all depends on how Argentina line up. If Argentina line up trying to contain Mbappe, trying to contain the French individual quality in the final third, then we could be in for quite a cagey affair. If Argentina do line up with a back four and attack France as England tried to do, then I think we could be in for a very, very good game, similar to that of the quarterfinal. But yeah, no, I'm hoping it will be a good game and a really good watch tactically.
I'll push you then, lastly, for a score prediction.
I would say 2-1 France. I won't give a goal for us.
Extra time, France 1-0. Messi's going to get his heart broken again, I think.
And Oscar, finally.
World Cup final is all about moments. You've got two of the best moments players in the world, Mbappe and Messi. Messi will show that he's the greatest ever, and he will win it 1-0 with a second half goal.
Both Oscar and Alex sticking with their teams there then. Well, thanks all three of you for joining me. Very good insights, unsurprisingly. And before we round up this stream, we're going to discuss some of the themes of the tournament, particularly the heavier topics like sports washing. And to come in for that discussion, I've got George, Rachel, and Ben P.
You're right, man.
All of you. I guess the obvious opening question is, do you feel like you've been sports washed?
I think I'd have to go with yes. I do think that the sports washing has been very effective. Put simply, I'm someone who's interested in, issues to do with race and gender. But at the end of the day, I tuned into every single minute I could of the World Cup, and Qatar was able to show me exactly what they wanted to show me during the World Cup. I also think that a lot of people have kind of missed what I think Qatar were actually going for with their sports washing. I don't think they were so bothered to sports wash your, average Joe like myself or anyone else. I think really what this tournament was a statement to other countries and to other governments that, hey, we're a big international player now. We're someone who's on the main stage. We've taken this sport that you hold so dear to your heart and turned it into what we want it to be, a facilitator for being recognised by the major governments. So I think every answer that we came to when we spoke about sports washing prior to this ended up being a yes. The sports washing was very effective.
Yeah, I would agree with Ben. I think ultimately it has all gone relatively well for Qatar. I think there are things that they would have wanted to have gone better. The football in particular, right? Obviously, they've put so much time and money into the Aspire Academy, and it just didn't quite click on the pitch. The players simply weren't good enough, even with all that, time and money behind it. But I think simply by the tournament being in Qatar, by it being successful, people have enjoyed it. It has, as Ben said, legitimized the idea that you can do things like this again in Qatar, in similar countries, and people will just enjoy it and get on with it. I think that, really, whilst there was so much scrutiny before the tournament, and there has been bits throughout, especially with some of Adam Crafton at The Athletic's great reporting of the death of a Filipino worker early on and another death during the Netherlands-Argentina quarterfinal from a stadium worker. But really, everyone has just enjoyed it. The fans I've spoken to in Qatar have just had a great time. They say it's a lovely place. It's clean. It's been just been really positive everywhere they've been. And I think most of the journalistic coverage of it has ended up being quite either sort of ambivalent to the sports washing or just ignored it altogether.
Rachel, do you think as a non-football fan it's cut through to you in the same way that it might have done for others of us?
Yeah, so whilst I'm usually quite cautious to comment on football due to not being like as deeply enamoured with the sport as the people around me, I do want to say it's been particularly interesting to have seen a new side to such a famous sporting event. So like on the one hand, being able to digest what the people around me at home and online tend to talk about when it comes to the World Cup. But then on the other hand, this time around, being involved with trying to properly tackle the journalistic side of covering a World Cup. Like never have I been so involved with trying to understand the smallest details, as well as having those moral debates about whether as a reporter I'd feel comfortable in myself going as a reporter in person, giving the human rights issues and controversial landscape surrounding the tournament. It's like we talked about the notion of sports washing and how it's been effective, like what George said, for the fans in this instance. But I do think there's the element of journalistic awareness and wanting to speak up about certain issues has led me to like a new way of thinking about it, because from what I've seen, like the people that I've been like covering it with, they're so passionate and they have such a love for the sport that it does seem from an outsider's perspective that it outweighs the justification to act in any extreme way against it happening. Just made it a bit clearer for me.
So with that, what will the tournament's overwhelming legacy be? Will we remember the football over everything else, or will we be able to keep our eyes on the sports washing, do we think?
Yeah, I think that ultimately this will go down in memory as Lionel Messi's first World Cup win or Kylian Mbappe's second World Cup win. I think that for the most part, all of the talks about human rights issues, using migrant workers, even bribing FIFA to get the World Cup in the first place, will all fade into the background. This will be remembered for what happened on the pitch. And we're seeing that happen now, even with the reporting that's coming out of Qatar. None of it is, or very little of it is, about human rights anymore. I think that it won't go away completely, but at the end of the day, it will be remembered for what happened on the pitch, which was ultimately what Qatar wanted. They wanted to showcase themselves as a future destination for events, as a country that could successfully hold such a major sporting event. And I think that they have proven they can do that. And they have also proven that in spite of all the backlash that preceded the tournament, at the end of the day, it will go away by itself.
Yeah, I think English fans and journalists were always quite likely to get swept up in any sort of great run towards the trophy that England were having. Obviously, it was going very well for a while. But I think these sort of final week or so of the tournament could have been a great opportunity to go back and recover those issues in great depth and spend a lot of time thinking about how we're going to define the legacy of this tournament. But because it's ended up in the perfect position for Qatar, where their club, PSG, their two biggest stars, Kylian Mbappe and Lionel Messi, are playing each other for a narrative dream of a World Cup final, all of the focus has stayed on that, even though England have gone out, even though a lot of the big nations are out, all the focus is still on the football because it's just worked so perfectly for Qatar in that sense.
So there's obviously a lot of negative discussion for the reasons that we've mentioned. what have been the positives from this World Cup, do we think?
I'd say a major one would obviously be what it's meant for female officials in the sport. So obviously, again, going off my outsider perspective kind of vibe, I've just loved to see that, you know, the stats are like 92 years after the first World Cup, Stephanie Frapport has made history as the first woman to be the lead referee during a men's match at the tournament. I just think that's an incredible thing that we can take away from it, and it's the perfect addition to her already brilliant accolades. Like, as a ref, she was previously the first woman to officiate a World Cup qualifier back in March, and then the first for a Champions League match back in 2020. So we can go one more even to discuss that she was joined by Nusa Bak and Karen Diaz to make the first all-female referee team at a World Cup. That was the Germany-Costa Rica game. And it's just nice to see, as like a casual fan, that women can lead these big sporting events.
Yeah, definitely. I think hopefully we're only, a World Cup or two away from actually seeing women on the coaching staff as well. I think another big takeaway will be how successfully Qatar have put together a World Cup in such a small space and shown how great it can be to have stadiums literally within walking distance of each other. I also think that one of the most iconic moments or takeaways from this World Cup will be Stadium 974, the idea of a collapsible stadium. We've seen in every World Cup going back, as far as you can, stadiums that were purpose built and have just fallen into disrepair. Especially in places like Brazil and South Africa. You've got these monoliths that had so much money spent on them and now have no purpose. Whereas this stadium, they're planning on packing it up and moving it elsewhere. And I think that's a really cool thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there have been positives from the point of view that fans seem to have thoroughly enjoyed it and coped without copious amounts of alcohol. I know there has been some alcohol. I know people have managed to get that, but it was mentioned earlier, no fan arrests for English and Welsh fans, just classic issues like that would mar or overshadow a World Cup haven't in this case. Obviously, there have been other issues that we've mentioned that have massively overshadowed part of it, but it has shown that you can fuel a World Cup on a love of football rather than just alcohol. And I think that's something that is quite nice to take away in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that one of the better aspects of the World Cup has, with it being based in Qatar, is it allowing African fans the ability to travel to the World Cup, since it's only, spitting distance from North Africa. I think that played a big part in Morocco's success, having every game feel like a home game because of the amount of fans that were able to turn up. I mean, we talk about a World Cup being for the global game and for the global audience, and it is good to see Middle Eastern and African people being able to go to a World Cup. If it was based in South America or North America, like the next one will be, or Europe, that's slightly less accessible for them. I think that we are also going to see a growth in the ability of Middle Eastern footballing teams. As George alluded to, Qatar have put a lot of money into trying to make a successful football team, and I don't think that ends with this World Cup. And we also saw Saudi Arabia pull off arguably the biggest shock of this tournament. I think that those are two sides that will want to continue to develop their football teams.
Yeah, definitely. And that's been for sure one of the benefits of it as well, has been the Moroccan fans really lit up some of the latter stages.
And the Senegal fans as well.
Yeah, they were viral, weren't they, when their team was playing. Thanks, three of you, for coming on to talk about some of the heavier topics. I'm glad we could end it on a more positive note, though. That's all we've got time for today. So that's the end of our World Cup review stream. we hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone who came in to participate, and hopefully Sunday's match will not be the cagey affair that we realise it may be. So for more of our World Cup coverage, you can check out the Southwest Londoner website. But when regarding the stream, that's everything. Thank you for watching.